Good evening, Mr. Palmer. How are you, sir?
Good morning, John. How are you?
Now, people are going to think you're in like Asia and I'm in the U.S. or something, and I'm realizing I'm going to have to leave it, but I guess my video somehow got unmirrored and it's really bothering me. I'm out of sync. I have no idea. Anyways, it's one of those days. It's Monday.
It's Monday. It's actually evening, but I just thought I'd screw you up by saying good morning.
Doesn't take much. And we're off the rails in a really short amount of time. Now, we don't have anything major planned, just a minor chat about something important. But I put a timer on it, and you can actually see the timer.
Oh, yeah. 25 minutes.
Yeah. So we're going to try and see if we can keep this to 25 minutes, folks. If it doesn't, then everybody who listened to this live gets a free R770.
Well,
there's a big catch there. So I'm okay. I'm okay.
You're okay.
We're recording this. This is not a live stream. I did that once. I did that. I can't remember when. I think I did that at WLPC where I actually clicked live stream and record and didn't remember that we were live streaming. Anyways, so now that I've completely blown everything up, complete with timer, what's on the agenda today, Mr. Palmer?
So I've been doing a whole lot of work after WLPC, Mobile World Congress, and of course, the big news, is I think as much as we talked about it last year, it's still going to be Wi-Fi 7. I've still had so many different conversations about Wi-Fi 7, and especially 6 gigahertz. And so it's funny, we did an internal survey with a bunch of SEs, actually all the SEs, and only a handful of them replied. But I probably shouldn't say that out loud. But anyway, there was one of the constant themes that I got in this survey response was some confusion between like Wi-Fi 7 and Wi-Fi 6E and 6 gigahertz and stuff like that. And so I think what we might do as we intersperse this between normal conversations with normal people and our top 10 series, I want to do a little bit of deep dives onto some 6 gigahertz things that maybe a whole lot of people don't understand. And so my favorite, maybe not your favorite, but my favorite is I want to talk about PSD, or power spectral density. So that's kind of what I'd like to talk about today, if it's okay with everybody else. And
again, I guess if they're listening live, they can object. So we'll give them a second.
Yeah, I mean,
there's nobody listening live, so
it's kind of like when I did this at WLPC. I was like, you know what, this time is mine.
Yeah,
I want to talk about power spectral density, and since I have time, let's talk about power spectral density. And so
it's fair. I'm not objecting.
Well, see, so now everybody else has to hold their peace because nobody else objected.
It's true.
So if you watch my WLPC presentation, this is kind of similar, but I've added some more things because, of course, we've done more work and I've done more research into this.
I mean, let's be realistic. A lot has changed since we left WLPC.
Well,
a lot has become more realistic.
A lot has become more realistic, but more importantly, what's happened is our understanding of it. I mean, this might sound funny, but WLPC was a month ago, and
yep.
We're learning so much, and we're sort of having time to digest everything that has happened and everything we talked about, and so now we have a little bit more understanding, or a little bit more, and so that's what I'm hoping to bring to everybody today, is this more insights into what we've learned and what we've realized about stuff especially around 6 gigahertz, and the fact that Wi-Fi 7 is not only 6 gigahertz. So I should probably have a different slide that says this. Wi-Fi 7, because it's backwards compatible to a certain extent ish, it works at 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. I've seen networks last year in the labs where it was a Wi-Fi 7 AP running on 2.4 gigahertz with a wide open SSID. It's perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with doing that, because there is a difference between the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz band, and then this 6 gigahertz band that came in just recently. So while a lot of times those get conflated, you can't do that. Those are 3 different things. And so you just have to keep in mind that there are 6 gigahertz things and there are Wi-Fi 7 things. And sometimes they'll overlap if you're talking about 6 gigahertz, but oftentimes they don't. And PSD just happens to be one of them. This isn't something that was introduced in Wi-Fi 7. This came about with 6 gigahertz. And so it's applicable to Wi-Fi 6E and to Wi-Fi 7. But let's talk about PSD. So the first thing we want to talk about is this operating chart. Now, this is something that I came up with based on a different chart that I saw that was very similar to this, but I didn't like the way it was laid out. And so I said, I need to make it clear for me and all the work that I'm doing. And so I came up with this chart. Now, something I will point out to everybody is that in the bottom left-hand corner, this is based off of Title 47, Subpart 15.407A, 4 through 12, paragraph 4 through 12. And this is from the United States FCC. So this is for just the regulatory domain of the USA. There are a lot of other different regulatory bodies. There's ETSI, there's Ofcom, there's all kinds of different standalone entities. I mean, there's just every country will have their own things. And so just because I happen to be working in the US and all of my APs run with a country code of USA, I have to get, this is what I use. But for other, and what I found in looking back in all the documentation and all the information is you're either following the USA, and you'll know this based on which unis you are allowed to use. Now, most of the time the chart says they all start at 5.925 gigahertz, and then they'll go up, but they'll go up to one of 2 numbers. The first one being 6.425, which is that first 500 megahertz of spectrum. The second number is the 7.125. And so depending on where you live and what, bodies, who controls your spectrum, you're either going to be just Uni 5 or you're going to be 5 through 8. And sort of following in conjunction with that is also this idea about standard power, AFC controlled, and low power indoor only modes of operation. If you only have the first 500 megahertz of spectrum, chances are you only have low power indoor mode. If you have the whole chunk, you get all 1200 megahertz of spectrum, then chances are you either already have an AFC that allows you to do standard power, or you don't have it yet, but it's in the works. So those are the sort of the 2 different things. And we're going to get into that here in a little bit. But I want to talk about, more importantly, the max PSD, or power spectral density. And what you'll see here is we're going to just pay attention to the low power indoor right now, because standard power gets a little funky. What you'll see is the client power is a -1 PSD, whereas the AP power is a 5 PSD. You with me, John?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like light reading topic for a Monday evening. I'm telling you right now. Stuff like this, just as a quick, this is when I tell, like when I was teaching RCWA, stuff like this is what I tell, why I say to people that you're learning Wi-Fi all over again.
Well, yes and no. I mean, look, we still had EIRP values, right? We're still limited by EIRP. EIRP, for those of you who don't know, is effective isotropic radiated power. What that means is we take the power, or what we're measuring is the power that actually leaves the antenna, that actually leaves the device. And when you sort of backtrack through devices, and all devices are the same in this regard, you have your antenna gain plus or minus, I guess you could say. You have the gain of the antenna, But you also have loss between your antenna and the radio that actually generates the signal. So you have the radio that generates the signal and it sends it over something, whether it's sometimes it's a little wire, a little cable, or it's a trace on a circuit board, or there's something, right? And so there's always going to be loss in there. And so EIRP is a calculation of the amount of energy that is generated by the transmitter minus the loss in the cable or in the trace and the path that it takes. Think of it as like free space path loss, but it's not free space. It's actually, cables or traces, or it's a hardware path loss, right? And then you get to the gain of the antenna. And so you take, if you have a plus 20, you have a minus 6 dB through your path loss. Then you have a plus 6 dB gain on your antenna array. You then end up with an EIRP of 20. It's 20 minus 6 plus 6. The 6 is minus and plus cancel each other out. You end up with, a 20 dBm EIRP. Now, we've always had these EIRP limits. They're 36 dBm. They've just existed since it's always been there. So whether or not you knew about it, whether or not you thought about it from a Wi-Fi perspective, these limitations have always existed. This isn't a new concept. What we're doing now is what's different is the power spectral density. So let's get into that part, since we've now spent half the time talking, just getting to the point where we can talk about it. So I pointed it out on the chart. An LPI client is minus 1 dBm, and PSD is defined as dBms per megahertz of channel bandwidth. So if you're a nerdy math guy like me, you go, great. My client device that's running at 6 gigahertz will do minus 1 dBm per megahertz of channel bandwidth. So that's great. Let's take a look at what that looks like. And we go, so if I have a 160 megahertz wide channel and my client device can do minus 1 dBm, then I have minus 160 dBm of transmit power. Now, thanks to the odd way that it works, even a minus 160 dBm is still a plus 0. And then 15 zeros, and then a 1 milliwatt. You can't ever actually get down to like 0 milliwatts. Like you're always going to have some type of transmit power, even at a minus 160 dBm. But after you think about it, you go, wow, my phone transmitting it at that low of a transmit power makes no sense. So that cannot anywhere be close to being accurate. So then you go, all right, what if it's because I was using a minus 1 number? Maybe that's my problem, right? Maybe my math was screwed up because of that. Let's take the AP power. So the AP power is 5 dBm per megahertz of channel bandwidth. Great. So we take 5 dBm, we times it by 160 megahertz, which means that my AP that's transmitting on a 160 megahertz wide channel is going to have 800 dBm of transmit power, or 1E plus 80 milliwatts.
You didn't tell me there was going to be math tonight, Jim.
Look, they complain about it at WLPC, and the math's really not that hard. I mean, get out your little, your little calculator, like I keep on my desk, right? And you just type in 5 times 160, and you get 800. It's easy math, John. I'm not doing. 5 times 160. That's easy. Now the conversion's a little more difficult because, converting dBm to milliwatt isn't as quite as easy as my 4th grade math problems. And so I had to take 1E plus 80 milliwatts and dump that into a converter because, I can't. That number just doesn't work for me, right? It's more than 4th grade math. So, of course, that comes up with a metric boatload of wattages.
That is a trademarked industry standard.
Well, it is now. So,
that needs to be a sticker.
The metric boatload of wattages. We should do something like that.
Yeah.
But so as you can see, that is not the right way to calculate PSD. However, there is a right way, and the right way is you got to actually do a little conversion. And this is where John's math is going to get harder on a Monday evening, because you have to convert the dBms to milliwatts. Which isn't too bad, there's actually a reference figure, which is 0 dBm is equal to 1 milliwatt. And that's a radio standard. Hate to break it to you, but it's not just Wi-Fi. All radios use this same standard. So when we take a look at our numbers above, the -1 and the 5 dBm, and we convert those into milliwatts, now all of a sudden you get, for a client, 0.79 milliwatts. That's your LPI maximum client power spectral density, and then 3.16 for an AP. So because let's just focus on APs just so we can get through this real quick. So if you take 3.16 milliwatts and you times that by 20 megahertz, you get 63.2 milliwatts or 18 dBm. So in the US or any country code that follows the PSD of 5 dBm per megahertz of channel bandwidth for an AP, the maximum transmit power you can have is 18 dBm on a 20 megahertz wide channel, which coincidentally enough is where the management frames go out. Even in 5 gigahertz, when you run wider channels, we're still using that 20 megahertz wide primary channel as where all of our management frames go out of. So 18 dBm, now that's something I can get my head wrapped around. That's something that makes sense to me. You with me, John?
Sure. I may listen to this back. Yeah.
So the maximum that you can turn up your AP in 6 gigahertz when you're doing a design for low power indoor is 18 dBm. That's it. That's what the maximum allowed transmit power is. Now, when you take a look at it at, say, a data channel, because you're crazy and you're like, hey, I'm the only one in my neighborhood that has a 6 gigahertz AP, or I can't see anybody else when I go and look, and so I'm going to run a 160 megahertz wide channel, then you get 27 dBm. Now, coincidentally enough, the reason why we have power spectral density is if you know the concept of every time you double your channel bandwidth, you add 3 dB of noise. If you go from 20 to 40, 40 to 80, and then 80 to 160. Now we're getting into third grade math, John, so keep up with me. If you have 3 dB plus, times 3 times 3, we've now added 9 dB of noise into our channel. Now, 27 minus 18 just happens to be 9. So this is easy math, John. I don't know what everybody's complaining about. This is like third and fourth grade math, right? I mean, this isn't hard math.
Maybe it used to be. Math, third and fourth grade math isn't what we went to school for, but that's a different topic for an entirely different podcast on a different channel. But anyways,
that's where the 9 dB comes from, right? Because now we're able to standardize and we're able to focus on the SNR. So our SNR value is the same. So that's where all that comes from, right? Now, the last thing I want to do is we're going to take all this and we're going to come back to what I was talking about earlier with EIRP, right? Now, this all works. Here's my values. We got 20, we got 80, we got 160s. And you can see, if I were to add in a 40, then it'd be right there at 21 dBm, right? 3 dB extra noise, 3 dB extra transmit power. It's simple, right? But now when we take in that last number and we combine it in there, a little too far on that, our EIRP values are 30 dBm. So this means that when the designers who do our controllers, they actually know how much loss we have through our APs, plus the gain of the antennas. So they won't allow us to set a transmit power that's going to violate the EIRPs. But when you look at places like the US where we have that almost 3 dB of overhead of cushion, we can creep right up next to that 30 dBm of EIRP value, right? So we have a little bit of wiggle room in there. We got some space. And if you're running 80s, you're just like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to run 80s across the board. You got 6 dB of antenna gain in your overhead. So that overhead gain from your antenna is not just what is the gain of my antenna, but it's what's my loss and then offset by my gain. So if you have 6 dB of loss, like we were talking about before, right? You're now looking at 18 dBm is reaching the antenna, but then you can add in 12 dB of gain, of antenna gain, and you're still below EIRP values. So when I mentioned that in the US we live in the land of milk and honey, this is one of the reasons why, is because of this EIRP value that we're looking at here. But for all of our brothers and sisters that don't live in the land of milk and honey, let's talk about ETSI limitations for a second. And this is the same across all of the EU. So Switzerland.
I'm a little slow, but that felt because I feel bad for them. You look at this chart and you can't help but feel bad for them.
Because they don't get 1200 megahertz. No. And here's the thing: it's not even just the EU, right? Like Japan, Australia, they only get 500 megahertz. So I'm really hoping that somebody lobbies and pushes hard for you guys to get more spectrum. However, it's not just about the spectrum. I'm going to walk through something else real quick, and this will just rain on everybody's Tuesday morning parade. So their PSD limitations are a little different than ours. So in the EU, you get 10 dBm per megahertz, which nicely enough is actually 10 milliwatts per megahertz. But you got an EIRP limitation of 23 dBm, right? So when you take a look at a 20 megahertz wide channel using PSD, you end up with 200 milliwatts or 23.01 dBm. So if you have any gain in your AP on the antenna arrays or antenna elements, period, that it does more than offset your loss between the radio and the antenna, you have to turn the power down. And that's at a 20 megahertz wide, right? Now, if you go, you know what? We have 500 megahertz of spectrum, so we're going to run 40 megahertz wide, because we have, that many channels. Now we can get away with running 40s. Anything that you go above 20 megahertz wide is going to cause you problems if the gain in your antennas offset the loss and then some. So at 80 megahertz wide, because you're like, I'm going to run in a lab, you're now looking at 29 dBm of transmitted power, but you're 6.03 dB above EIRP limits. So not only do people in the EU need to have, more spectrum, there's also a PSD thing that's going to come back and haunt them until this is fixed.
I mean, I can't help but wonder, and maybe we do have some EU and APAC SEs that we could certainly bug. We might have to call in a favor to get them to stay up late or get up early. But I almost wonder, knowing that you're getting less spectrum, even though we need all the spectrum we can get around the world, but you're getting less spectrum and even more crazy restrictions, you kind of almost wonder if somebody's going to sit there and say, is it even worth it?
Well, here's the thing. It is, right? Because we need more channels. That's just the long and short of it, right? We need more channels. Now, in the plus side, it's not, most people don't turn their APs up to the highest transmit power anyway when they do designs. Most of the design tools, the default transmit powers are below the maximum. So it then becomes a question of, well, what happens, especially with PSD, where those numbers fluctuate, right? If you turn the power down a little bit, how does that impact the way that it calculates, your controller platform calculates what is your transmit power? And the honest truth is, John, and I'm not, and take off any ruckus thing that I have, the honest truth is we don't know just yet, because it is still something that it's so new that we're still sort of struggling to understand how this works, that we honestly don't know how this is going to, how's this going to work, and as even without AFC, which adds the extra wrinkle. So just the wrinkle for AFC is it doesn't give you any of these DBM numbers that we're seeing up here. It gives you the EIRP limitation. So then you have to reverse engineer based on what your EIRP limitations to figure out what's your allowed transmit power. So luckily, the people who do the controller code do the math for us, so we don't have to think about it all the time. But it still then brings to mind, how are we going to troubleshoot? How are you going to see how this works in a network? Because you're doing a passive scan of the network. You're only looking at the beacons, and then you're extrapolating out how wide that channel is based on the information in the beacon frame itself. So you're not actually measuring the power of the data frames that are being sent out at a higher transmit power. So even if you can calculate it out and you can be like, you know what, we're always going to be at 23 dBm EIRP. 20 dBm EIRP is still better than zero. It's still better than having nothing, right? So don't look a gift horse in the mouth. We need 6 gigahertz. We need it 6 gigahertz in the EU. Some of the EU doesn't even have all of 5 gigahertz. So they need every single channel they can get their hands on. And so while it's a bummer and it's depressing when you think about it, you don't ever look at it and say, well, why do we bother? Well, we bother because we still need the spectrum. We still need it, even if it is with such limitations. But it also means, back to your point about relearning Wi-Fi, it's understanding that there's all these other little caveats that come with having 6 gigahertz. And then when you combine that, let me just throw this little nugget out to you to break your brain tonight and into tomorrow.
It wasn't already broken.
A lot of things that we set for networks, we set at the WLAN level. And if you have the same WLAN that works on 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz, because you want the reduced neighbor report to work, and for the AP to tell everybody in a reduced neighbor report on 5 gigahertz, hey, by the way, I got the same network over here on 6 gigahertz. Go to this channel over here. There's some different settings within a WLAN that has to do with RF. And so some settings that you've made traditionally in the past without thinking about it can come back and bite you in the future when you enable that same SSID on 6 gigahertz, because you can't think about it. I'll throw the one out that bit me. Join RSSI threshold.
Yeah, I mean,
that's set at the WLAN, but it applies to all the bands that it's running on.
So what you're saying, I'm going to be that troll. Sounds like we need a Wi-Fi 7 specific SSID. And I'm going to duck because there's a shoe thrown at me. I know we can't, but I mean, this is really the crux of why I said, like, I feel like, and I said it in my RCWA and I've said it before, like, I almost feel like I'm going to need to resit my CWNA and go through the basics again, because it's just, first of all, CWNA is always a good class. People love the book. It's a Bible. If you get a good instructor, it's worth it. But there's a lot of new stuff, and it's, even if it's not new, like to your point, PSD is not new with Wi-Fi 7. There's a lot of bits and pieces in here that if you're not in those weeds all the time, I'm not, you are. If you're not in the weeds enough or often enough or recent enough, however you want to put it, this is going to be a lot that comes back. And, to your point about troubleshooting and support, if you're a global organization, if you're a teacher, I mean, it used to be you sit in front of the class, you say like 1, 6, and 11 are my non-overlapping channels in 2.4. It's a little bit different. You've got a couple different channels in APAC and EU. That's it. No big deal. Now, I mean, I could be wrong. I probably am. I usually am. But it feels like this is going to be the most distinct difference for Wi-Fi from country to country, or from governing body to governing body. That you can't make a blanket statement anymore. I mean, you probably shouldn't have been making blanket statements anyways, but a blanket statement that works in the US is going to be decidedly different and actually in violation of, at the moment, everything else everywhere else in the world. But to troll our brethren around and sisters around the world, everybody wants what the US has for Wi-Fi because we got it best. But it's a lot. And you know, we've talked about it before on here and, you know, in side chats. The last couple of years have been really rough for Wi-Fi professionals because there was a lot of time, and there still is, spent out of the office. We're not getting the same hands-on. We're not getting the same experience. Or people are starting to go back to the office. It's starting to happen. But now you've got 6 that kind of got skipped over, 6E that definitely some did and some didn't skip over. And now you got Wi-Fi 7. It's it really is a whole new world. It's exciting. Like you said, we need 6 gigahertz. We will find a way to screw it up. Don't worry. Give us a couple of years. But we needed it, and it'll get used. But it's a lot. And I mean, think about what's happened in the last 6 months, right? AFC became official last month. You know, speaking from the Ruckus thing, because we are a Ruckus podcast, we wear our Ruckus hats. The VSC7 code dropped about a month ago. The R770 started shipping last year. We've got more coming. So we've been hearing so much about it, and now everything is starting to move. So it's going to be exciting. Like you said, WLPC made a huge difference for a lot of us because it went from theoretical to practical. And maybe, I mean, there was definitely some hands-on there. There was a lot of people imparting us with their hands-on knowledge of what they've done with Wi-Fi 7. The next 6 to 12 months could be extremely exciting. It's going to be extremely drink through the fire hose feeling, I think.Maybe not the fire hose. Drink from the ocean is probably more apt. But it's exciting because, you know, again, I wasn't getting it. I was around. I was alive. Obviously, I'm not that young. But when 5 gigahertz, I wasn't a CWNE at the time when 5 gigahertz became a thing in Wi-Fi. So for a lot of us, not a lot of us, but for some of us, it's the first time we're getting new spectrum, new opportunities. It's so much. It's so much. And it's just, yeah, yeah. And you just melted my brain on a Monday night. Thank you.
Well, here's the thing. Sorry to melt your brain. I didn't mean to. But here's the thing, right? To me, it's not about learning it tonight or learning it today or learning it whenever you listen to this or watch this. It's about knowing what we don't know or knowing what you don't know, right? I don't expect you to take what I've talked about and internalize it to the point you could stand up in front of a group and explain it. What I'm hoping to do is I'm hoping to at least tickle your brain a little bit so that when this question comes up in the future, you go, wait a second, Jim and John were talking about this. Let me go back and because they mentioned this might be a thing, or this might be a problem, or you know, there's all these other weird oddities that are happening that I didn't really have to deal with in the past, right?
Sure.
And so it's about just educating you that there are some differences in how this works. There's some differences in how this is going to be deployed. You know, there like I was talking about with the joint RSSI threshold. That 100% bit me because I spun up a brand new SSID for my brand new Wi-Fi 7 AP that I got sitting over here on the floor. And I did my default settings, but it's almost like muscle memory at this point. When I went in, I was like, oh yeah, I set the joint RSSI threshold at like neg 70. And that screwed me. And so, but it's one of those things where if you talk about it and you hear people like us talk about it, it's something that, you know, maybe you remember and you go, oh, you know what? I'm having these weird issues. I'm having these odd issues. This could possibly be a thing. Let me go check this. Let me go Google it. Let me go research it. Let me go look for this stuff. That's why we're doing this, John. It's not to try to teach you right now to the point you can stand up and teach it to somebody else.
Oh God, no.
It's
what you're saying is we finally got to the point where, like, because it's a thing. Keith always says it at WLPC that eventually you've been doing this long enough and you contribute enough that you Google something and you find the answer from yourself. So it only took me like a decade and maybe I'll get there. But no, I mean, It's a lot to take in. I mean, I think, and honestly, for me, my exposure to PSD, I think, started when I was just going through high level and looking at them like, wait a minute, the power levels look kind of funky, just like raw levels, not PSD included. And I'm like, I don't understand how Wi-Fi 7, how 6 gigahertz is going to be worth it for outdoor. If you're talking about distances, high pole mounts, stuff like that, like it seemed underpowered for whatever and I can't remember what I was looking at. But then you were like, but wait, did you factor in PSD? And I'm like, huh? And but again, it's stuff, like you said, it's been around, but if you don't know, you don't know. And I didn't know. And I know a little bit more than I did, but it's part of the new world.
But here's the other thing to keep in mind, right? Is like you're talking about outdoor. For those people that live in a regulatory domain that's lucky enough to get outdoor and AFC, you're looking at a maxi IRP of 36 dBm, which is what it is in 5 gigahertz. And so assuming you can get the transmit power, assuming that you can still run your gains on the antennas, the fact that there's not a whole lot of devices in 6 gigahertz means that you have a much lower noise floor. And so it's still very applicable to be used outdoors, assuming you have that, right? Any amount of spectrum we get, even with limitations, we need to understand is still a gift. We didn't pay for this spectrum. I mean, we might have felt like we paid for it, but in the end of the day, we're not like a cell company that went to auction and bought, even 500 megahertz worth of spectrum, because that would cost you a whole lot. We just couldn't afford it. And so this is a gift, and, it does have limitations, but once you sort of learn and once you understand that there's limitations, then it's easier to deal with the one thing at a time, because, 5 gigahertz really came into its own in 802.11n when they went, hey, we're going to do dual band. But don't forget that there was 802.11a that was doing OFDM in 1999. Now, granted, you couldn't get the gear till 2000, but it's still, when you look at it today, they're still, they'll still be like, oh, it's 802.11a. When you look at it in Wireshark, right, at 5 gigahertz, it'll be like, yeah, it's 802.11a. It's OFDM. Well, it took us 24 years to learn everything we know about 5 gigahertz. It's going to take us hopefully not 24 years to figure out 6 gigahertz, but it's still going to take us a little bit of time. So don't feel angry. Don't feel agitated. Don't feel discouraged if you don't know and understand this, because you're learning with the rest of us. So embrace the unknown, embrace the fact that, hey, there's a lot we still don't know. And half of the stuff we say today is probably going to be wrong in the future. So,
and the beauty part, we'll probably do, because I know you're going to love it, we're going to probably do more Wi-Fi 7 podcasts between now and the end of the year. It's a given. Well, but there's so much new coming out. You were talking about a certain trip you've got coming up in a couple of weeks where you're probably going to learn more, and it's just going to continue to go and go. And ultimately, all the different events, right? You've got a few more WLPCs coming up. We just had one. Those kinds of events, getting around for bake-offs, getting the gear into the customer's hands, which is happening. It's all going to give us more and more information, more experience. And, Jim and John talking about PSD in, September, October is going to be a vastly different conversation, where I'm probably going to hopefully look a lot less glossed over with my eyes. I'm not going to look like less out of it, because we'll have the experience. So it's a very, again, drinking from the ocean is an apt comparison, but I still think it's an exciting time to be a wireless engineer.
It is, and I think part of it, and we've sort of touched around this, but, Wi-Fi 6E was never fully embraced by the vendors. I thought Ruckus and our two APs were sort of falling down until I just went and looked at everybody else and went, wait, we're not the only ones with 2, and most of them have 3, and maybe there's one vendor that has 4. So it wasn't fully embraced by any vendor. Yeah. So that's not a secret. You can just go look it up. Because we knew that Wi-Fi 7 was coming. right? I mean, when you think about the timing of everything, Wi-Fi 6 was 2019. We're now 2024. So but we're 4 or 5 years after that. And 6E came 2 years ago. So it was never fully embraced because we knew Wi-Fi 7 was coming, and we knew that Wi-Fi 7 was being built from the ground up to deal and take advantage of 6 gigahertz. And so Wi-Fi 7 was always going to be this learning experience for everybody. And so just like, people will poo-poo Wi-Fi, or can't even call it Wi-Fi number, 802.11a as being, worthless. It wasn't. There was a lot that was learned by that, and we're still basing things off of that. So don't feel bad. Don't be too hard on yourself, everybody. Just know that these things exist, and know that, you're going to have to do a little bit more homework when these questions come up, because it is just different. Yeah.
Homework. Come on, man. It's a podcast. We don't want homework.
It's not my deep dive where I give you homework. So
yeah, you've got a reputation for that. Excuse me. Anyways, I think we've just about gotten PTSD from PSD. That joke. So I don't know. Do you have anything else to close this one out, Jim?
No, I think I've gone through enough 3rd and 4th grade math for tonight. We can wrap this one up, and just, again, don't feel bad if you didn't get it the first pass, because I sure didn't.
There you go, folks. Well, all right, Mr. Palmer, I will catch you on the next one. Have a good evening. And let's, I'm looking for something, I swear. There we go. All right, man. Have a good one.
Hey, I'll talk to you later.
If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us using the address ruckcast@comscope.com. To learn more about Ruckus products and services that we may have talked about on this or any other podcast, please check the links in the About section of the show.